Hello everyone, and welcome back to For Fun and Profit. My name is Basilisk, and I'm still your host, so let's get started. Now, before I get into anything else, I gotta apologize for missing last week's episode. Truth is, between the topic I had planned for that week not turning out to be as interesting to talk about as I first thought it would be, and other issues keeping me distracted, I simply ran out of time. However, I'm back now, and it's time to talk about why player-made parties are important to have in the RPG genre, so let's get into it. Now, let's be clear, I am not saying that every RPG needs to have a player-made party. I am also not talking specifically about a player-made protagonist in a game where the rest of the party is predetermined. That latter one is a separate video all its own someday. In addition, this topic will be mostly focused on the Western and JRPG genres. Now, let's get cracking, shall we? Player-made parties in RPGs are a very old thing. The early days of Western RPGs on the PC used them almost exclusively due to a combination of the heavy and Dungeons and Dragons influence in Western RPGs and the difficulty in making pre-made characters interesting in games that didn't always have the ability to actually show battles instead of having to describe them to you. They were also present in the early days of JRPGs. The two biggest flagships of the early JRPG genre were Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, and each had 3 games on the NES, though not all of them were translated when they came out. Only one game in each series, the second game in both cases, weirdly enough, had pre-made parties that would come to dominate the genre past the NES era. 3 of the remaining 4, Final Fantasy 1 and 3, as well as Dragon Quest 3, used player-made parties, with the third game in both series even having a job class system. For those curious, Dragon Quest I only had a single party member throughout the whole game and is thus not relevant to this topic. After the Super Nintendo came out, however, and technology started to advance on the PC, things changed for both Western and JRPGs. I have an itchy head. Western RPGs began to focus more and more on a single hero that was customizable, while JRPGs started making the pre-made parties that the genre is known for these days. So why did player-made parties disappear from both genres as fast and as near totally as it did? Honestly, it's because player-made parties don't really play to the strengths of either genre. For Western RPGs, the focus is on role-playing, and role-playing as an entire party is difficult to program and would likely dilute the experience for the player, so that genre focuses more on a single player-made protagonist. JRPGs focus more on the dynamics between the party members, which would be lost with a player-made party, so they focus more on groups of player-made characters. So, if player-made parties don't really play to either genre's strengths, why am I arguing that they should be included in both genres, at least every so often? Well, it's because while player-made parties don't directly contribute to either genre, they offer something else entirely that is very valuable on its own that works in both genres. You see, player-made parties allow the player to completely craft their own story for the characters in the party. How do they interact with each other? How do they work together? How do they react to the world and the events that they experience? That's all up for the player to decide. That is a very valuable type of storytelling, allowing the player a near complete freedom to decide that part of the story for themselves. Now, of course, this storytelling is all in the player's head. Even the best games of this type, like the Etrian Odyssey series, don't have the game allow the player to show the interactions that they want their party to have in any real way. To do so would be a programming nightmare, though the game that could pull that off would be a sight to behold, that's for damn sure. Then, of course, some players won't bother with crafting the story in their head, and that's fine. They'll focus more on making a strong party to beat the game with, and more power to them if that's what they enjoy. But for the player that does enjoy that kind of story crafting, they will become so much more invested in the world thanks to the stories they've been making in their head. Now, I suppose one could make the very sound argument that games that focus on player-made parties rather than being part of the Western or JRPG genres should be a genre all their own. Honestly, I very much agree, but that idea highlights a problem with the way game genres are defined. I touched on this in the RPG genres mini-series, But the game industry pretty much only uses mechanics to define a genre outside of a few special cases like Western and JRPGs. And player-made parties aren't really a mechanic. They don't define how the game is played, and they don't really change how the story is presented. All the impact they really have is in the player's head, after all. Still, though, despite that, I do think they should be at least a subheading under both Western and JRPGs, if not their own genre altogether. They have too much value to just be discarded as a relic of the early days of gaming. And that's where this episode ends, folks. I know it was a shorter one, but I've said all I have to say today, and I'm sore and tired as all hell from way too much yard work. So join me here next week for more video game design. In the meantime, thank you all so much for watching, and good night, folks.